Hi guys, and welcome to the show. Very special video today. A little change of format. We're not going to go straight into the white glove, hands-on perspective just yet because, and this only happens on the Urban Gentry, the watch in question today, the Pepsi Black Bay GMT, some jammy Gentry member out there will have a chance to actually win the piece we're reviewing today. Thanks to Timeless Luxury in Frisco, Texas. They are a huge, highly respected, authorized dealer for many, many big brands. You guys know I've talked about them. They're one of my 7 top trusted sellers of luxury watches. So without further ado, let's change perspectives, get into the review, and then we'll come back and I'll give you the lowdown on how to win this spectacular creation from Tudor. So if you recall a few weeks ago, was it a week ago? I can't quite remember. I did the unboxing. I reviewed actually the new Rolex GMT, which incidentally, if you want to have an overview of the history of Rolex's GMT with all the various references and how the modern one came to be, I'll leave a link up there. Have a look back at that video. Equally, if you want to look at the history of the Tudor Black Bay and how that came to be, I did a duel with, I think it was actually my wristwatch check. Perfect timing. There's my little, my darling little Tudor Submariner. In the duel against my Rolex Submariner, I discussed the history of Tudor's dive watches, which basically leads up to the Black Bay and Tudor's modern divers. So I think to give this video true context, do check out those earlier videos if you haven't already, because I'm not going to discuss the history in this particular video. I just want to focus on reviewing this majestic beast of a watch. Let's discuss the basic specifications and dimensions and all the rest of it. So the diameter is 41 millimeters. We got a height of just shy of 14.5 millimeters. Lug to lug, we're looking at exactly 50 millimeters, and a lug width of 22 millimeters. So quite a contemporary size, rather on the large side, especially from lug to lug. But in fact, the proportions are almost identical to the Black Bay, your typical Black Bay Heritage diver. Of course, I owned the Heritage, the very first generation with those ETAs. This, however, has a brand new caliber. This is an in-house movement manufactured by Tudor. It's the MT5652. It's cost certified. It operates at 28,800 vibrations an hour. It's a self-winding with manual wind, bi-directional rotor system, 26 joules. It is, of course, hackable and has an impressive power reserve of 70 hours. Now, if you actually look at the movement, it has those very typical Rolex traits. It's remarkably similar actually in its appearance to Rolex's 3285. The architecture is unmistakably Rolex. We also have the addition of the variable inertia balance wheel to improve precision. We see the same full balance bridge that makes it stable, reliable, those very typical Rolex traits. And it's no surprise if you're not familiar with Tudor and Rolex by now, as we've discussed a million times. Tudor was the younger brother of Rolex, and much of that ingenuity, innovation, and know-how has gone into pretty much every single aspect of the watch. Now, it is cost certified. From what I understand, a slightly less stringent standard to Rolex, the bigger cousin there, or the bigger brother, however you want to look at it. It's about +6 to -4 out of the factory. Rolex famously regulate theirs to about ±2, although having said that, you'll probably likely find that it's behaving even more accurately than that. We also get a silicon non-magnetic balance spring, and the movement itself a brutalist, futuristic look compared to the Rolex, with this contrast of satinized and bead blasted, gives it a very utilitarian look. I like the fact that it's not decorated to the nines. We have a tiny bit of beveling, etc., and a semi-skeletonized rotor. As we see Rolex continuing its climb of the luxury status symbol ladder, Tudor very much is staying in that tool watch category, and the movement just screams it. However, we don't get to see the movement because we have that typical Rolex and Tudor style case back, and the entire case is stainless steel, obviously, with beautiful mirror high polish finish on the sides, very generous beveling on that quite curvy lug there, and then on the top of the lugs we have brushing that is followed through onto the steel bracelet. We have these faux rivets on the side in a high polish, which I will discuss later, with a slight concave curve, and they do taper in steps, very, very indicative of those 60s Rolex oyster bracelets, of course. The clasp is beautifully machined. I really do like the clasp. There are some things I don't like about it, which we'll discuss at the end. If we look closely there, we have spring-loaded ball bearings, not only on the fold-over to keep the fold-over in place, but also on the actual main little locking mechanism. It's not really a locking mechanism, but you get what I mean. So it's not as complex in terms like Rolex's oyster lock clasp, but it's nice. I mean, it's very nice to operate, and I love how they've incorporated the Tudor shield logo, of course, into the clasp there. We do get micro adjustments, only 3 however. Screwed links, of course, as you'd come to expect. Let me just pull in some links so you can see them. I had to remove a few for my skinny little wrist, but yeah, very, very solid, 3-piece bracelet. The brushing and the quality of the bracelet itself is phenomenal. Now, talking of logos, if we look around at the crown there, we have that beautiful rose relief of that Tudor rose, the old school Tudor logo, which unfortunately they stopped using back in the, I think it was 69 or 70 when they switched. Even my Tudor has the newer shield logo. We did see a return of it on some of the earlier Black Bays, which I do absolutely love. As you guys know, Hans Waldorf was a massive Anglophile and had huge admiration for British history. And of course, the Tudor rose is emblematic of the Tudor royal dynasty. So, being British myself, obviously, I've always loved that connection. The crown itself is a screw-down crown with a very nice coin edge that matches the 24-hour bezel, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Operating the crown is absolutely fantastic. It's I've always loved the Tudor Black Bay crowns. Very, very easy to unscrew, of course. The manual wind is so buttery smooth. I mean, I know I always say that, but you almost don't feel like you're winding it. It doesn't have that clickety-click feeling that is so satisfying. But it's not as grainy at the same time as an ETA. It certainly feels very refined, and well, I know that's not any kind of scientific way to judge a movement, but it's the tactile feeling of it. It's very satisfying. In the first position, we have manual wind. Obviously, if we pull it out to the second position, it moves the hour hand, that beautifully iconic snowflake, in hour increments, and also forwards the date, which I'll just show you there. There you go, just popped over. I'll just do it again. Boom. Very snappy and responsive. If we pull it out all the way, then all the hands move. So, being a GMT, short for Greenwich Mean Time, we have that extra 24-hour hand in red. It is actually 200 meters water resistant. Threading is fantastic, and of course we don't have crown guards because that very 1950s big crown Submariner inspired aesthetic. And if you want to find out more about that, have a look back at my Tudor Submariner versus Rolex Submariner video. So the bezel itself is a little tricky to get a hold of, especially with gloves. Much easier with your hands. It's bidirectional, and sets to 48 positions with the ratcheting. The colors, I think, are wonderful. Almost a red reminiscent of the old Rolex GMT Masters. It's slightly a little bit more subdued, more on the burgundy side. Somebody mentioned in the unboxing that the colors were inspired from the other black bays. I have to say, I think they differ. This red has a little bit more liveliness to it. It's not the same red as we see on the hand. The blue, however, is definitely different. It's more of an Aegean, almost a spruce blue. Looks grey at times in a dark room, and as I move it, you'll see what I mean. And then in a lot of light, has a bit more vividness to it as well. The choice of numerals is quite interesting and a lot more in keeping with its vintage inspired aesthetic. They haven't gone with the modernist approach like the new Rolex with the ceramic bezel, and at the same time it differs from the Rolex GMT Master. If you look at the angles of the actual lettering, it's more of a condensed style of font, but very vintage feeling, certainly. There's also quite a bit of difference on the dial itself. The markers are slightly, ever so slightly, a smidgen smaller than the Black Bay Divers. We have applied indices, and if we compare it to the GMT Master, they're positioned, especially the arrow at the 12, almost touches that minute track. I really do like that. It's very subtle, but a lovely touch. Now there's a very specific reason. As I move the hands around, you'll see that the GMT hand, Snowflake, is almost at the edge. Now it's to position it outwards compared to the seconds hand, but also as we pass the date window at the 3 o'clock, it doesn't obscure the date. I mean, you could say it does a little bit, but it's still readable. You just angle it and there you go. You've got the date. Very subtle touch, but I think it works, because one of the complaints of the chronograph in particular was the hour hand obscuring the subdials. To assist that retro feeling, we have a domed sapphire, which sits quite confidently and framed beautifully by the bezel. Very much evokes the feeling of the 50s, though it will never have the same distortions as acrylic and Hesselite and all the rest of it. It does have some nice bit of charm to it. Dial itself is a matte black with that grain finish. The print is an off-white bordering on silver, and I think there's just enough text on the dial. We don't have the Pelagos problems of you know, a novel written there. GMT chronometer officially certified. Very, very tiny at the bottom, Swiss made. The lume itself is Super Luminova, is extremely legible, responsive, very easy to distinguish the hands from one another, and we get superb orientation with that trusted dive style layout of the different shaped indices. So, big question is, how does this bad boy wear? Let's pop it on the wrist and find out. I have a 6¼ inch wrist, so yeah, it's certainly going to be on the big side for me. There was some quite problematic issues with getting the sizing right for me, and we'll discuss that in the negatives. It has a very statuesque fit. It's a tall one. I've seen Valjoux 7750 chronographs that are slimmer than this. It really shouldn't be that tall. I feel it's to its detriment. It's quite top heavy. It has a lot of heft. Now, if you're larger wristed and you like a reassuringly solid feeling watch, you're going to love it. If you're on the smaller wristed size like myself, it's actually going to be quite uncomfortable. Also, lug to lug is very wide, so you have a danger of overhanging. The weight on the bracelet is about 188 grams, and about 100 of that is the actual bracelet. It's a lot of extra weight. However, it's very legible. And it certainly feels like quality. I mean, it's got a very reassuring feel to it. Now, if you're not into bracelets, if you wear it on a NATO strap, that's actually going to boost its height even more. And it's probably one of my biggest problems, and why I still don't own a Tudor Submariner. Sorry, horological fraud slip there. A Black Bay myself. So anyway, let's take it off the wrist and summarize the watch. So let's start with the positives first. Well, like everybody has been saying, it is a great value proposition. You know, you're getting an in-house movement with amazing performance. It is actually 200 meters water resistant, double that of Rolex's latest offering. GMT watches are often a great travel companion, faithful to their original intention of being able to tell time in multiple time zones. It's one of my favorite complications, certainly practical if you're like me and you have family overseas. Just looking at the time in a foreign country, or even a third location with the rotating, bi-directional rotating bezel. I think they got the colors absolutely spot on. Certainly much more so than Rolex did. I think the Rolex colors in the flesh, upon seeing it, were a bit of a disappointment. And I said that in the review. It feels much more faithful to what the original, it feels like a tool fit for purpose. The quality is absolutely exquisite. The fit and finish is as you'd come to expect, especially when it comes to the polishing, is impeccable. I mean, really splendid to look at. Also, you don't get any of that luxury stigma that you do with Rolex. I like the fact that it hasn't got a cyclops, and yet the date is very legible. Costing about $3,000 to $4,000, I think it's excellent value for money. Truthfully, I don't think the value comes from the in-house movement and the quality. The true value comes from, okay, it's not a Rolex, but you are getting some of that Rolex magic. As the GMT Master, the vintage and its newer, brand new descendants continue to soar in value and become largely unattainable to most people, Tudor still offers that intrinsic value that is far more faithful to the origins of the brand. While you could say the GMT from Rolex is the vanguard, Tudor makes sure that there is still an obtainable option, which is what Hans Wilsdorf intended, that inherent quality, reliability, dependability, durability, and of course the accuracy here as well. I love the proportions and scale of the hands, the layout. I really appreciate the way it distinguishes it as a brand of its own. The same way, you know, Mercedes hands are just synonymous with Rolex. Might have a bit of a Marmite effect for some, but practically they're very efficient in assisting legibility, and very much helps to distinguish its own identity out of the shadows of Rolex. It's a logical complication to add to the lineup. We've seen chronographs, we've seen the bronze, we've seen the dark, we've seen the smaller version, and now finally a GMT. What's next? A world timer perhaps, but no, but I think it really completes such an important line of watches, because let's not forget that the Black Bay helped revitalize Tudor, the rejuvenization, reinvention into the powerhouse it has become. Would not be the brand it is today without the Black Bay family, without the Black Bay line of watches. However, there are some negatives. First of all, well, undoubtedly, it's a very bulky watch. I don't recall my Black Bay I owned, the red one back in the day, I don't recall it being quite as heavy, or maybe I've just got so accustomed to more, you know, traditional sized watches. Perhaps I'm biased, but it was really uncomfortable on the bracelet, especially after a day of wear. It just got annoying. Got to be honest, even when I had the Fortis Cosmonaut, the newer one, the B42, which is a massive beast of a thing, that was even more comfortable, which is, and that is a Valjoux 7750. It shouldn't have been so tall. I mean, look at it. If you compare, it's just, it's amazing. And actually, as we're looking at my little Rolex, I kind of wish it did have the spring bar hole, you know, the drilled lug holes. That would have been a nice addition. Certainly to differentiate it a little bit more, even more so to its luxury brother. The faux rivets, it's going to be a Marmite, I guess you could say Marmite feature for some. I personally feel it's a bit of a missed opportunity. I would have loved to see the spring-loaded expandable bracelets like Rolex did, if you remember that Newman Daytona I looked at years ago. I loved it. I thought it was really charming and fun. It would have really added a little bit more extra comfort to this watch. But I think it would have been a fantastic extra feature and really set it apart. Another big disappointment is the bezel. Now, while I think they got the colors absolutely bang on, the fact that we're still using anodized aluminium inserts, you know, on a $4,000, well, almost $4,000 watch. If I can get a fully loomed sapphire bezel on a Seiko or a micro brand for under $1,000, why can we not see it on a GMT? It would have made that complication that much more useful in low light and much more like the classic GMTs, you know, the Bakelite days. It's a bit of a missed opportunity again there. And lastly, the links. Now, while I appreciate the solid end links and the screwed links, you could only take one off this side as opposed to 3 or 4 on the other side, which means the clasp for the smaller wrist leans or is more heavier on one side. Although it's fine for me, if you have a smaller wrist than 6 1/4 inch like me, it's going to be unwearable. I mean, it's really going to be lopsided. And I think this added to some of the problems and discomfort when on the wrist. Had this watch, and it's nothing to do with the diameter, it's large here from lug to lug, and it's tall. So a real disappointment there, I feel. But if you've got the wrist for it, then half of these negatives are not going to be an issue for you. So this watch debuted at Bezel World 2018. I have an inkling. My gut instinct tells me that they're going to do a smaller version next year. I mean, I really hope they do. Possibly a 38 millimeter. That would have been absolutely perfect with a slimmer case. It's amazing how a few millimeters can make a world of difference. Ultimately, in conclusion, it's still a cracking watch. It's just strictly for the larger wristed. And I know it may seem that I have a lot of negatives there. Unlike virtually every online publication, you know, I'm not beholden to worrying that Tudor's going to pull out their advertising on my website or whatever, you know. So I'm going to tell it how it really is. And yeah, it was a bit of a disappointment in general. However, I think Tudor will come right. I think they'll do a smaller version for next year for Bezel World 2019, if there even will be a Bezel World 19 at this rate. But yeah. To enter into your chance to win this spectacular, handsome thing here, there's a link in the description. It will take you to the Timeless Luxury website. Follow the instructions. Obviously, before you go, don't forget to like this video. I mean, it would be rude not to, wouldn't it? So yeah, follow the link. All the details will be there. It's very, very easy. Got to give a massive shout out to Dan. He's given me the honor, the privilege of announcing the winner in 2 weeks' time. So stay tuned. So you got 2 weeks to enter in. For me, the last thing I have to say is I guess, which is my favorite out of this and the Rolex, the 2018 Pepsi release. I have to say I do prefer this. I like its unpretentious tool, you know. It's more of a tool watch, and I really respect that. Also, it's vastly more realistically priced. I'll say it right now, in 2019, if Tudor bring out a smaller version, I might sell my Rolex Pepsi for it and invest and put the leftover money towards my Grail. I would seriously do that. While it's not groundbreaking and it does have its shortcomings, it is still the Kipper's knickers. I mean, yeah, it's still pure class in its way. Good luck to all the Gentry members out there. Please don't forget to add your thoughts, queries, comments, opinions, all the rest of it down below. A massive shout out to Timeless once again, and Dan, all the best to you. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it, found it useful. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one. Okay guys, ciao.